Nice. So let us start. Although the fund is not here, the purse is not here. I think it's the same. Either he is here or not, it's the same, says Mr. Papadimitriou. No, that's not so. The purse is always important. So this session has to do with the most hot topic, that is funding the health sector and the problems we are faced with. Money is never enough. The point is how one can spend it in an intelligent way when the resources are not unlimited. So it's extremely important that we are at a turning point, actually, with regard to funding the health sector after the pandemic. Therefore, let us start with the first intro by Mr. Pascal Apostolides, who is the chairman of the Pharmaceutical Companies Committee in the Hellenic American Chamber of Commerce. Allow me to go to the tribune. Yes, I've got a presentation to make and slides to show. I have the additional difficulty that this roundtable and me personally compete with the enzymes following digestion enzymes following the lunch, but we'll try to keep you alive and kicking. So, from the discussions of the two-day conference, it's most evident that the challenges we are faced with today do not deter us, do not frighten us, and do not impede us from being optimistic, because the pharmaceutical sector is one of the basic pillars of our economy, with a very important financial footprint and huge potential for growth. It is true that health is subfunded in our country. We had it yesterday, we had it again today. But the increase of funding on the basis of the real patient's needs is not only a prerequisite for a better health sector, but it's also demanded for the development of the sector. In the previous session, we discussed the possibility to have an adjustment on the basis of growth, and we believe that at least as a minimum, the increase of pharma expenditure should be equal to the increase of the GDP. So without structural changes, control and monitoring of the consumption, DRGs, therapeutic controls, protocols, and a ceiling on the expenditure, we cannot do much. But equally important is to abdicate the rationale of dealing the pharma industry as cost centers. They should be viewed as a multiplier for development and employment. One might expect me to talk about the latest measures and what has happened in the field of innovative drugs. I do not ignore that. This is the primordial and most important aspect, and we don't leave that behind. But because I expected to have the minister with us, and we want to demonstrate that beyond what he says, that he views the innovative drug as a cost center, I would like to refer to other aspects, presenting three opportunities, actually two possibilities and one opportunity. So in order to demonstrate the specific proposals that might contribute to higher revenues for the health system and the development of jobs without any burdening on the national budget, as it is usually retorted. A most characteristic example are the R&D actions and clinical trials, which is a very strong passport for growth in the country. Please note that in Europe, 40 billion euros are invested in R&D annually, and in our country, a poor 100 million euros. And we will see in due course that under the new measures that were taken, these 100 millions that can be absorbed by the pharma industry, the one that invested this in clinical trials, are below 10 million, below 10 in number. So the increase in the average of the EU entails overall investments of 500 million euros, which will bring about an annual increase of 1.1 billion euros in the GDP of the country, 270 million in tax revenues, and thousands of new jobs of high specialty, high-skilled jobs. Our country has all the guarantees to attract the investments it deserves in clinical trials and be promoted as an investment hub for the whole Southeastern Europe. How can this happen? First, we need the support of innovation and offering incentives for R&D and development through incentives that will be attractive to all. Second, specific studies for clinical trials must be effected and overcoming the various red tape problems in public administration. And third, the creation of one-stop shop that we will be responsible for all the administrative processes of clinical trials. A second opportunity as a multiplier for growth, it was mentioned in all two previous tables, and unfortunately it's still untapped. And what is this? In close cooperation with the previous chapter, the clinical trials that is, our country can be an important attraction hub for investment for the exploiting of real-world evidence that comes from the research processing of data, of real-world data. Because in our country we have a unique advantage, that of e-prescription data and business intelligence, that is the data of the referrals and the tests affected that have been compiled ever since 2012. This is a real wealth respective to the golden tomb of Philippus. Each year, pharma industry invests hundreds of millions of euros to have access to real-world data. And what I show here, and I will say so to the minister, we have the possibility, instead of playing the tug of war and being recycling in the misery of pharmaceutical expenditure that remained stable for the last 7-8 years between both innovative and domestic companies, there are 1.8 billion euros of buyout that could be invested on health. Just think of the huge development perspective we have ahead of us. This can be one more success story that might create immediately new potential for our country. Other European countries have already made important steps for the exploitation of real-world evidence under the full observance of GDPR. And in this example, I can show you Finland that has exploited that data, and we've seen that 700 demands have been filed and 500 of them have been dealt with. If we were to look at 30 years back and said that our country has a potential in accounting services, and one would say, yes, we did have that potential, but we'll be needing the infrastructure. Excuse me, the speaker meant logistics. But we didn't have this wonderful current road network. Now we do have it. I refer to the national roads. We have the 5G data. I refer to investments already done. Cisco, by Amazon, by Google, by Microsoft. Investments already made here, who have determined Greece as a hub of Southeastern Europe for data accumulation, processing, and export elsewhere. The third and last example is a quicker access in the system that will create field for innovation is the establishment of a pharmaceutical innovation fund, a proposal that guards all companies, both multinational and domestic ones, because thus we can have the transfer, the know-how transfer, and as we see in countries such as Italy, Wales, UK, and quickly Slovakia. Quickly we'll have a specific cost that will secure access of all patients to innovative drugs. The benefits from such a fund can be towards quicker access of patients to innovative drugs, avoiding additional clawback of those that are all there in the prescription, documented expenditure and rationalization of the closed budget, and this is a message to the minister who is absent, and sufficient time to the Minister of Health for reforms without pressure. In concluding, I would like to refer to an opportunity that was demonstrated during this conference, and this one opportunity is the total lack of exploitation of the resources that we spend in the health system. We had an example yesterday with the initiative taken by a pharmaceutical company and Aggelos hospital, where instead of having the cancer patients' care in the hospital, following some time, this can go on at home, which of course will save resources for the health system, beds, and cost from the hospitalization. A similar initiative in the past, in 2012, that many companies jointly started it, and I refer to Project Rio, showed that just one lab, the hemodynamic one, can save 24 million euros by receiving all the materials, pharmaceutical that is, just in time, which for this specific hospital, it was 24 million euros. And if it was to be expanded to the whole system, that would be 1 billion euros. This is how we can find and save resources for innovation instead of playing this tug of war between domestic and international pharma industry. Thank you. We warmly thank you, Mr. Apostolides. Allow me to give the floor to Mr. Theodore Tryfon, because he is with us virtually, and perhaps he cannot attend for the whole discussion.
Right, good evening. Yes, I have no problem. I can remain online, but I can take the floor now if you prefer. Yes, let's do it like that, because that's what the director is telling me. Right, so you have the floor, sir. Is Mr. Skylakakis there? Moderator says no. Okay, so I would like to thank the American Hellenic Chamber of Commerce and Mr. Apostolides, the President of Pharmaceutical Companies Committee, and I would like to say that I couldn't agree more with the three development and growth things that he said. And dear Akis, I want to say about the second one, the second pillar, which is very important, the real-world evidence. It's something that we have been developing in our big live sense park in collaboration with American companies. I'll come up and I'll chat you up close and personal. I should like to welcome and greet my other colleagues in the field. What I want to say is this. There are many problems. They are very well known. We've been reiterating them for years. But it's a given that the more the problems grow, the closer we eventually come to a solution. Of course, there are external facts that do influence greatly all the decisions in this time and place. For me, there is a central problem. The state, for a great number of years, does not trust the pharma industry. This appears to have started after 2009 due to the increased expenditures in health and drug. The pharmaceutical industry was targeted far more than it should. Many things happened in terms of compliance and other practices that enlarged and expanded the problem. But it should be said that it is an international problem. It's not a Greek privilege. In Greece, however, we magnify everything in this very well-known way, and there is a lack of trust. Why? Because no matter what data we show on the basis of the needs of the patient and the population and the increase of the needs that due to various conditions that are pan-European and global, we cannot convince anyone that we are underfunded. So this is a key issue that we need, using evidence and with a rational way of evaluating and assessing how the government wants to support the drug area and within the framework of the other priorities they have, to compare these things. Second subject, unfortunately, although we have e-prescription and IDIKA is very well organized and they've taken huge strides forward over the past few years, unfortunately we do not have data and information analysis in a way that will allow us to lead ourselves to political decisions that will lead to streamlining and rationalization. it is a sine qua non condition because, well, I heard someone say that we have 12 million patients who are constantly receiving multiple drugs. We have 10,400 pharmacies and 650 diagnostic centers. As you realize, this is something that unless we have an interconnection of all these and interoperability, it is impossible to handle. This, in parallel with the personal health record and with clear-cut directions and guidelines that need to be made mandatory, we can never, ever end up with a final decision regarding the policy. What happens in the meantime? Well, we say 50 million for this category, 40 million for category B, 10 million for category C, increase the rebate, reduce the clawback, and something that is not up to par for such a modernizing government and for a country such as Greece. So we have an obligation, and this is the pre-election time, mind you, we have this obligation, and this is something we will do overall to respond, to answer, because we're constantly being forced to spread and divide amongst ourselves this underfunded budget in a way that it is indivisible. It is impossible. Now, I have some data that I would like to share with you. I have a small presentation, if I can try to share it. I think you can see my my slides. Right, well, here you can see the reduction. Well, of course, we started with a very high number for Greece. What happened between 2009 and 2019, cumulatively in the overall funding and in public funding? Whereas in southern countries and in the EU we had an increase rather than decrease, in Greece, due to the memoranda, we had a huge adaptation. Next slide, please. Thank you. Public expenditure, 5.9% of the GDP to the right-hand side, as compared to 7.3 and 8.7%, of which the southern countries and the EU have as an average. We have these numbers and we need to remember them as a country. Next slide, please. Public and private pharmaceutical spending per capita. The public is on the left, lower than the EU average. It is clear what happened, and the huge burden has been shouldered, the biggest burden has been shouldered by the companies and the patients themselves. Next slide, please. Now, I should like us to focus a bit more on this slide. To the left, you see 2009. It was obviously a very big amount for Greece's standards. There was lack of data, and things are much more organized now. Since then, from 2009 to 2021, the last 12, 13 years, at least 1 to 1.2 billion has been introduced in new drugs. There has been an increase in drug users, patient needs, aging population. Europe has paved the way and the other countries follow, so there is a higher cost and longer duration of treatments. And the good thing is that we had approximately 800 million in reductions of prices, because you understand where things would have gone with the clawback. Unfortunately, these dropped much more in the older drugs than it should have. And in this system we have an increase of substitution. So it's quite clear, crystal clear. At the moment, we had an increase in the average price and an indirect price and expenses in the peak. But this, to an extent, it is clear that innovation must move forward and must be available in each and every country. Next slide, please. Now, generics spending has been maintained. It was spent. The clawback drops, and these two... Now, let's move to the previous slide, if you please. Excellent. So on the basis of this information, it is quite clear that we should all agree that there is a need for rational funding. Or at least the ministry should, the state rather, should take a look at some categories and take action. It is very important that we have this co-accountability clause Now with the 150 additional million will be much more substantial. But I'm afraid that this may lead anyone into turning clawback into rebate, or to move into horizontal or violent reductions in prices, or to go to the negotiations committee each and every time and be accompanied by our lawyers. So when you go to the committee and you say that, well, if you were outside you would pay clawback 70% and here you need to pay 72%, this is something that happens in no country, and it can't happen in Greece either. So we need to move to a clawback cut per category of drug. We need it to be linked to use and consumption. It's something we need to do over the next 2 or 3 years maximum. It is quite clear that when the industry is asking for funding, the industry is not making a vague request. There are categories such as the uninsured, so we have spending for the uninsured. There are the effect drugs. There are categories such as the percentage of the channeling of the drugs to the extra hospital, the out-of-hospital market. There are areas where the drugs are underfunded. Some of them have been underfunded as a function of the needs of the population, but we need to set up an innovation fund. Next year, when we have new drugs introduced at a cost of 100 or 150 million, how will we get to pay for them? So we need to have a targeted policy in place, fast, soon, rather than to spread and divide amongst ourselves the very low budget we have available. In conclusion, I would like to say 2 things about investments. Now, this was aimed for the minister. Moderator informs the speaker that Mr. Skylakakis is here. Good evening, Mr. Skylakakis. Good afternoon, Mr. Skylakakis. Good afternoon. Well, I don't know whether you were here at the part when we asked for reasonable funding. Okay. Well, I think you said it 3 or 4 times, so I got at least once, says the minister. Oh, I apologize, says Mr. Tryfon. I thought you were absent. So what I wanted to say is that we're asking for various things at the same time. And these are things that we've already discussed with the minister. At the moment, it is a given fact that we have an extended use of drugs in the Greek population. It is justified to a point. This needs to be justified. This needs to be explained. We can't keep saying that we're still giving the drugs we're giving now without any corrections. In the various billions that have been given during the crisis, part of that money that has to do with targeted expenses needs to be given now. I don't know whether Mr. Skylakakis heard that. This is linked to fast-tracking some things that need to be done now that will allow the coordination, as I said, of, as I said, we have 12 million patients who are now receiving various drugs, not just one. 50,000 doctors, 10,500 pharmacies, 650 diagnostic centers. These need to be linked immediately for us to have a rational utilization and use of the drugs. The third thing is that it's very important to know that the incentives need to be enhanced. And I want to close with this because underfunding creates counter-incentives for investment. It is a very positive fact that we had in the RRF the clawback reduction, and its inclusion in the RRF has created some problems with the state aid law. And we are expected to follow that and follow the new things, what is eligible and what isn't, to follow the rates and the percentages regarding investments on fixed assets in various areas. But it's a very crucial tool. And I would like to see some of the slides, the last 2 slides. I'm afraid it's a little difficult. Oh, it's not. Now, the profitability and the reciprocity we have seen is huge for Greek economy. It is quite clear that investments like those of Pfizer that have a different direction are very welcome. Okay, and the real-world evidence and the social studies and everything is very important. And let's move on to the next slides, please. Here we are. Everything is useful and it needs to be multiplied. At the moment, investments we have with the RRF is 570 million, a total of 990 million by 2023. It's a huge amount in a very difficult conjuncture in time. And this is a very positive thing. At a time that, I repeat, the rebates we give and the refunds we give are outside any scope of logic and any financial logic. Now, dear friends, I have two examples here in my hands. This is a drug that the company pays 1.4 euros. We pay 42% clawback. Carvapen. It's Carvapen. We cover hundreds of thousands of patients. It's for heart failure. The next drugs would would cost 5 as much or 10 times as much. We have inflation cost. Now the cost exceeds the net price we receive, and there's no separation, and we pay the exact same percentage with the old drugs and the new drugs. Second drug for angina pectoris, 2.02 euros we receive. It's monosordil, it's the cost of people, amortizations, offsets, and we cover 80,000 patients. These things, in a country that wishes to continue to have local domestic production, rather than going, well, not to Albania, but any other country, it will not be cheaper. It needs to be taken into consideration. The investment assistance we have is very important, but it only covers 40% of our needs. Next slide, please. Next one, please. Luckily, we have exports. Otherwise, the debts we have with the AOP and the new burdens we are expected to shoulder from the clawbacks are such that are suffocating us increasingly. Let's move on to the next slide, the last one. I wanted to close with this one. Despite all adversity, our group, the LPEM, thanks to the RRF project and to export secondarily, and I hope that the local market will support us more and will allow us to increase our investment. A huge investment project is what we're doing. It's in full-fledged, it's being rolled out. It's the modernization of our 3 units in PhRMA, a new factory of 12,000 square meters in Keratea, which will be completed by November this year. And the big endeavor is 25,000 square meters, the innovation life science park that we talked with Mr. Apostolides, that one of the things we'll do is what was discussed earlier in Sparta. This was what we'll do. And all this creates an industrial and research ecosystem in the eastern part of Attiki. 45,000 square meters. We are the largest such complex of any industry, not just pharma. And at the same time, an increase in jobs. We will start an oncology drugs unit in Tripolis. What am I trying to say with all this is that, well, Greece has a huge growth drive and potential and capacity. We can't do these things alone. We need collaboration from the multinationals, either with the life science park or the production of drugs or whatnot. In order for multinationals to invest here, they need a clear-cut environment. Let's hope that in the time to come, shortly, we will be able to correct some of the distortions and the past problems. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Tryfon. Mr. President, let's give the floor now to the alternate Minister for Finance, Mr. Skylakakis.
Well, we have been saying again and again that the medicine is not a cost center. There are huge opportunity in the field of clinical trials, of innovation, of R&D. So there's a development aspect in the sector. It's not merely an expenditure. You have the floor. So let us start by saying that obviously there is a growth potential, and we have offered a lot of resources in comparison to any other sector as far as this development aspect is concerned. That is, the resources reach €500,000 in the investment clawback, which is most important sum if we take into consideration what we used to do before RRF and the resources which are earmarked now with RRF, which are quickly dispersed. This is an industry with great potential and very dynamic, especially following the pandemic and the fact that Europe at large and the Western world want to have great supply safety in comparison to the past for many things, including, of course, par excellence, the medicines. Now, the issue of clawback is a very thorny subject for all. By introducing the investment clawback, the government commit itself at the same time for a very serious reduction of clawback or an increase of the budget expenditure respective to this reduction. This is included in our agreement with the European Commission. And either of the two will take place. Our will is obviously not to have any expenditure, additional expenditure. So how can we attain that? There are certain interventions in the pharma budget that change things and shift things from one line to another. There are some interventions concerning the incentives, that is, we transfer greater load on the medicines that are pushing upward the pharmaceutical expenditure, because not all drugs are the same, nor all drugs have the same profit margin, nor do they have the same profit margin at the same time. This is a very complicated equation, very difficult sector to be judged on simple and rigid market terms. There are also other measures that I personally prefer, that we consider far more useful and critical, which are the structural measures, structural interventions, and first and foremost, the therapeutical protocols, which my encouragement towards and my encouragement in the Ministry of Health is to be introduced as soon as possible for the more expensive medicines. Because if you see what are the drivers of the expenditure, the medicines that are drivers of the expenditure, you'll see that there are only 10 or 12 drugs or treatments. And there, we have many scientists, the way those very expensive treatments are applied. Now, beyond that, there's also another query that arises: how much fiscal space we have, so as to increase the pharmaceutical expenditure per se. I reiterate, we have assumed the risk to make a very serious increase of pharmaceutical expenditure. We already did so as a government, remarkable rise in pharma expenditure. We already took away certain medicines, the clawback. Vaccines, for instance, were omitted. I don't know whether they are calculated, whether we have the table that I saw, whether we have included or not included the vaccines, because that makes a huge difference in the calculations. But anyway, the fiscal period is difficult. Obviously, it's not easy. We are faced with huge crises. We have the obligation to put money where the patients most need it, where they're really burnt, literally speaking, that is electricity and heating, because they might freeze during winter time. And of course, this absorbs a huge fiscal space, absorbs resources. Now, what is to happen in the future? Who can tell? There is legislation stipulating that depending on the increase of the GDP, there's a direct correlation of the pharmaceutical expenditure. This has not been implemented when the GDP was shrunk, because it's a bilateral relation. In the future, it will be applied, that there will be a direct function of the GDP fluctuation with the pharmaceutical expenditure. And I hope that some of the structural measures I have described will move ahead faster, in a faster way, so as the clawback to be dramatically reduced. And we hope that it will be shrunk, this clawback, due to the reform efforts of our government. Now, let me point out here that we speak of clawback, but we haven't taken into consideration that on the basis of the latest Eurostat data, the pharmaceutical expenditure that is not reimbursed cash is inscribed in the deficit. Therefore, we have at a permanent basis, due to the delay of payment of clawback, at least 300 to 400 million euros of additional expenditure in our accounts. So we bear as public accounting in relation to 2019 at least 500 million additional euros of pharmaceutical expenditure. That is exacerbation of the deficit because of the pharmaceutical expenditure, because of the delayed clawback collection, plus the risk you assume according to the agreement we made with the European Commission on the investment clawback, plus the money we gave directly for the investment clawback, which was a front load, and that was also important. Therefore, we have made a very generous contribution, plus some other measures that were already taken, such as the way prescription will be affected, for instance, in public hospitals for certain categories, target groups of patients who have made quite a job. The great wager, if you like, are DRGs, the therapeutical protocols, because it is indeed there that we intervene in a field where the intervention is structural and reformative, and it's not merely sharing and money or shifting different breakdowns from one category to the other. Well, thank you. Let us proceed with Mr. Olympios Papadimitriou, the president of the Hellenic Association of Pharmaceutical Companies. Please take the floor.
Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. Thank you very much. I would like to thank the AmCham for the invitation. I can see the title of our table. It's the Strengthening Health Financing, whether it's a prerequisite for agile responses to future crises. The answer is yes. But there is a second question. Is it enough to strengthen health financing to deal with future crises? And there, the answer is a resounding no. I fear that since the answer to the second question is no, the first won't happen either. And this is really a fundamental problem for our sector. I will try through some slides to show you why funding is a necessary prerequisite, and I suppose that towards the end it will be made clear why it's not sufficient. No matter what we see, no matter what we read around us, we can see trends that are conducive to the fact that healthcare needs and health coverage needs increase. It's in all the reports everyone has seen, it's in all the statistics that are out there. And if I want to focus a bit more on the Greek reality, the data I have to present, I don't know how clearly you can see it, it's OECD data. It shows that one of our countries ranks one of the worst in Europe in terms of child obesity, one of the worst in the EU as pertains to adult smoking. There's a huge incidence of new cases of cancer per year. We have rates of diabetes mellitus of 11% in the adult population. It should be noted that since I'm working in this field, that when I worked in pharma, the then measurements that were definitely not full because we were always lacking in data, it said that the diabetes in the population is around 4 to 5%. I'm talking about before the year 2000. And now we're talking about 11%. We're talking about adult obesity, approximately 30%, 1 in 3. And we're talking about the fact that approximately 4 out of 10 Greeks suffer from at least one chronic disease or one chronic condition. I think this slide was shown earlier as well. Data shows that our system, as compared to others in the EU, is underfunded. So while all this is happening, we have a relative cascade of new licenses from the EMA for various treatment fields. 54 new active substances in 2021. And overall, an incessant research activity that leads up to licensing and is, as a rule of law, accompanied by revolutionary treatment results. These are results that no country would want to deprive their citizens of. At the same time, taking a glance at other markets from IQVIA to look at other markets in Europe, we can see that in retail, in the part of private pharmacies that is, there is a constant rise of the consumption of reimbursed drugs. As a matter of fact, our country does not appear to rank first in this. Some other countries appear to be, which the current 12 months have had more pronounced increases. Pharmaceutical spending is increased in the entire civilized world because there is morbidity, because there are new drugs, because of COVID. So it's reasonable for funding not to remain stable. But is funding enough? Does it suffice? Well, here's where the problems start, at least for us. If we need to recognize a timeless success for the ministries of health of our country over the past 10 or 12 years, it's that they have managed to make us distribute our sparsity of funds amongst ourselves. Who will pay what and to split the tab? If the drugs cost €1 and they refund 40%, or whether they cost €5,000, in which case they are very expensive and we should refund 70%. So this is a discussion that does not end anywhere. It's even more sad when one considers that according to the EU, the deficit also includes arrears, which usually does not have anything to do with international companies, it has to do with local, domestic companies. It's a difficult approach of sorts. So all these general discussions, what they can do is bring dissent to this sector, or to make us bury our heads in the sand in front of this lack of funding. Now, this is an example you know very well. It's a variation on the same theme. I've tried to depict how spending course and changed over the years and the tricks we've been adopting with the clawback, which is what the minister said, much to his honor. It's something we've already discussed. Unfortunately, the Ministry of Finance, at least the solutions they are presenting, are not visible. We need to look elsewhere for solutions. What I'm trying to say is that spending appears to be in a downward spiral over the years in blue, whereas refunds and rebates are reimbursements rather, or refunds, it's correct what I said, are on the rise. And with this opportunity, I would be remiss and unfair if I didn't stress that this government has repeatedly enhanced pharma, drugs, with some well-funding injections. The bad news is that they're not enough. It does not suffice. In the structural part, we still have the deficit and the lacking that we have had over the past few years. And unfortunately for us, the counter is still ticking. Every month we have 7.5 million prescriptions at an average, which we do not make. We do not issue the prescriptions, and we do not execute the prescriptions. What we do is we feed the market and we promote our products, but we do not issue the prescriptions. Now, the stop and the inhibition, I believe, is non-existent. So why is expenditure reduced in blue? Because we have the DRGs, the closed budgets. If you bother to take a look at the top right part of the slide, you need to add this part, which is net spending, to the bottom blue, to go to the 2.00 or 2.88. For those of you who have participated in closed budgets, please correct me if I'm wrong, but about half you've paid back. So we should calculate at least twice as much as refunds. So to move into the 2022 projection, green and red is what is expected by the state to get back from the industry in general, and blue is what they pay for the AOP. Now, for the hospital market, well, you know, things are even worse there. You're very well aware of that. So the problem still remains. Funding is clearly not enough. The issue is that the more the structural change delay, the more necessary they become. Thank you very much. No, thank you, President, and I would like now to give the floor to Mrs. Agata Jakoncic, President of Pharma Innovation Forum Greece.
Καλό σας απόγευμα. Θέλω να ευχαριστήσω την Οργανωτική Επιτροπή για την ευγενή πρόσκληση και τον Άκη Αποστολίδη. Πάρα πολλά έχουν συζητηθεί ήδη. Θα προσπαθούσα λοιπόν να τα βάλω λίγο σε οπτική από σκοπιάς της φαρμακευτικής καινοτομικής βιομηχανίας. Δεν νομίζω ότι είναι δύσκολο. Είμαι το μόνο γυναικείο όνομα σε αυτό το πάνελ, αλλά βρίσκεται τις διαφάνειές μου. Ευχαριστώ. Η οπτική λοιπόν από την καινοτομική φαρμακευτική βιομηχανία. Μιλήσαμε περί καινοτομίας. Τι είναι, περί τίνος πρόκειται. Παρέχει δύο πράγματα. Ασφαλής ζωής και υποστηρίζει την οικονομική ανάπτυξη. Πώς γίνεται αυτό? Μια πρόσφατη μελέτη που δημοσίευσε ο FDA, μελέτη που διεξήχθη από το 2000 στο 2009, χάρη στην καινοτομία, το προσδόκιμο ζωής αυξήθηκε κατά 2 χρόνια. Μόνο χάρη στην καινοτομία. Οποιοςδήποτε λοιπόν γεννιέται σήμερα μπορεί να έχει ένα προσδόκιμο ζωής τουλάχιστον 2 χρόνια μεγαλύτερο. Και πώς υποστηρίζει την οικονομία? Με το να είναι ασφαλής, το να έχουμε ασφαλείς πληθυσμούς, σημαίνει ότι μπορούν να εργάζονται στη θέση τους. Μιλήσαμε λοιπόν και άκουσα ήδη κατ' επανάληψη το θέμα της ανάπτυξης. Αυτό που βλέπουμε λοιπόν εδώ είναι ουσιαστικά τις τελευταία στοιχεία, στατιστικά στοιχεία που δίνει ο ΕΟΠΗ σε ό,τι αφορά την κατανάλωση. Στην αριστερή πλευρά της διαφάνειας βλέπετε τις μονάδες και στη δεξιά τα βλέπετε εκπεφρασμένα σε εκατομμύρια ευρώ που έχουν δαπανηθεί. Στην πρώτη στήλη λοιπόν έχουμε φάρμακα τα οποία είναι με εταιρικό όνομα, πατενταρισμένα. Περίοδο από το 18 στο 21. Βλέπουμε λοιπόν ότι τα προϊόντα αυτή την τετραετία δεν αυξήθηκαν σε αριθμό, ούτε σε αξία στην κατανάλωση. Άρα βλέπουμε ότι κατά μέσον όρο παραμένουμε σε σταθερή πορεία. Αφήνω τα συμπεράσματα σε όλους στο τι συμβαίνει με οποιοδήποτε άλλο προϊόν. Καταλήξτε εσείς σε συμπεράσματα. Βλέπετε λοιπόν ότι έχουμε τώρα προϊόντα που είναι εκτός περίοδου προστασίας, εκτός πατέντας δηλαδή, έχουμε τα γενώσιμα και έχουμε τα βιομοαειδή. Βλέπετε ότι μπορεί να υπάρχει διαφορά μεταξύ των προϊόντων, αλλά η όλη κατηγορία είναι πάλι συνεχής στην ίδια περίοδο, τετραετή περίοδο. Για να έχουμε μια υπόμνηση τώρα πώς τα διαφορετικά τμήματα λειτουργούν. Ξέρετε, έχουμε ένα προϊόν το οποίο διανέμεται στα νοσοκομεία, έχουμε διαφορετικά κανάλια, τα λεγόμενα 1α, 1β και έχουμε και την διανομή την ιδιωτική, στα φαρμακεία. Βλέπουμε λοιπόν τώρα αριστερά την διανομή για το 1α, δηλαδή για τις πιο καινοτόμες θεραπείες, και δεξιά το 1β. Προσπαθούμε να παρακολουθήσουμε την πορεία του ασθενούς. Έρχεται ο ασθενής, γίνεται διάγνωση στο γιατρό, παρακολουθούμε αριστερά, γίνεται διάγνωση από τον γιατρό και στη συνέχεια αποφασίζεται η θεραπεία. Αποφασίζει δηλαδή ο γιατρός ποια είναι η κατάλληλη θεραπεία για τον κάθε ασθενή. την προτείνει στο ηλεκτρονικό σύστημα συνταγογράφησης και υπάρχουν 3 ανεξάρτητοι γιατροί που επιβεβαιώνουν ότι είναι σωστή η διάγνωση και η προτινόμενη θεραπεία. 3 ανεξάρτητοι γιατροί. Ας υποθέσουμε ότι πρόκειται για αιματολογικό περίπτωση ή περίπτωση κρίνησης κατά πλάκας ή καρκινοπαθούς. Όταν επιβεβαιωθεί όλο αυτό, πηγαίνει στο ΕΟΠΗ και το Διοικητικό Συμβούλιο του ΕΟΠΗ δίνει τελική επιβεβαίωση ή απορρίπτει το ένα ή το ένα ή το άλλο. Άρα υπάρχουν πολύ αυστηροί μηχανισμοί ελέγχου από 3 ανεξάρτητους γιατρούς και το Διοικητικό Συμβούλιο του ΕΟΠΗ μέχρι ότου πάρει το σωστό φάρμακο ο ασθενής. Στην λιανική αγορά τα πράγματα είναι πιο απλά. Ο ασθενής πάει στο γιατρό του, το προδιαγράφει του, το συνταγογραφεί ο γιατρός, πηγαίνει στο φαρμακείο και τα αγοράζει. Άκουσα μάλιστα από κάποιον ή μπορεί να αποφασίσει ο γιατρός ότι όχι, ο ασθενής ότι δεν πρόκειται να κάνω τίποτα, θα ζήσω το υπόλοιπο του βήμα όπως γουστάρω, δεν παίρνω κανένα φάρμακο. Υπάρχουν κάποια θεραπευτικά πρωτόκολλα, όπως είπαμε και προηγουμένως, όπου πρέπει να επενδύσουμε περισσότερο για να προσφέρουμε περισσότερες εναλλακτικές. Αυτό που προσπαθώ λοιπόν να καταδείξω είναι ότι στην αριστερή πλευρά, όπου πρόκειται για πιο καινοτόμες και πολύπλοκες θεραπείες ή για πιο απειλητικές ασθένειες, υπάρχει ελεγκτικός μηχανισμός και πολύ αυστηρός ήδη. Προκειμένου λοιπόν να μην επαναλαμβανόμαστε, τι συνέβη τελευταία στην Ελλάδα σε ό,τι αφορά τις επιστροφές? Συζητάτε κατά κόρον τα clawbacks και τις επιστροφές. Ελπίζω λοιπόν να μπορείτε να δείτε τα αριθμούς. Βλέπω τώρα είναι πάρα πολύ μικροί. Πού να τους δείτε? Ας υποθέσουμε ποια είναι η κατάσταση το 2022 για διαφορετικά σημεία παράδοση του φάρμακου. Είτε πρόκειται για αγορές για ένα προϊόν 100 ευρώ, κατά μέσον όρο η επιστροφή ήταν 46 ευρώ. Μπορεί να υπάρχουν διαφορά μεταξύ διαφορετικών προϊόντων, αλλά κατά μέσον όρο η επιστροφή είναι 46 ευρώ. Εάν αυτό το προϊόν παραδόθηκε στον ΕΟΠΗ, τότε 70% επιστρέφεται. Μια πολύ μικρή κατηγορία φαρμάκων είναι αυτό, σε σχέση με οποιοδήποτε άλλο φάρμακο, με οποιοδήποτε άλλο προϋπολογισμό. Και στο νοσοκομείο δεν έχουμε αναπροϊόν, αλλά μπορούμε να εικάσουμε ότι περίπου 50% είναι η επιστροφή. Φέτος λοιπόν τον Ιούλιο πέρασε κάποιος καινούριος νόμος. Τι συνέβη? Ένα κομμάτι των προϊόντων που ήταν στο σύνολο των λιανικής, το 1β, μεταφέρθηκαν στην μικρή κατηγορία του ΕΟΠΗ, το κανάλι του ΕΟΠΗ, και μεταφέρθηκαν στην κατηγορία όπου οι απαιτήσεις είναι να καταβληθεί 70%. Δηλαδή για προϊόν 100 ευρώ τα 70 πρέπει να επιστραφούν. Τι συνέβη στη λιανική αγορά? Στην λιανική αγορά κατά μέσον όρο τα πράγματα άλλαξαν από αυτή την νομοθεσία. Από 46-47% παρέμειναν. Τα νοσοκομεία δεν ξέρουμε. Ξέρουμε ότι τα φθηνά προϊόντα δεν πρόκειται να εξαιρεθούν από το clawback. Και πιθανόν όλοι μας διαβάσαμε ένα πρόσφατο δελτίο τύπου, όπου υπάρχει κάποια πρόθεση, αναφέρεται, να βελτιωθεί η υφιστάμενη κατάσταση, γιατί φαντάζεστε, δεν είναι δύσκολο να φανταστείτε ότι δεν μπορούμε να ανταποκριθούμε και να επιβιώσουμε με επιστροφή 70%. Υπήρξαν λοιπόν κάποιες συζητήσεις ότι θα υπάρξει κάποια βελτίωση και ένας εξορθολογισμός. Ακόμα και με αυτές τις βελτιώσεις όμως η αγορά λιανικής θα εξακολουθεί να καταβάλει το 40% σε επιστροφές και το καινοτόμο τμήμα του ΕΟΠΗ με τον μεγάλο έλεγχο, αντί να επιστρέφει το 70% θα επιστρέφει το 65%. Και πάλι για τα νοσοκομεία δεν ξέρουμε, δεν μπορούμε να σχολιάσουμε. Να τονίσω εδώ ότι αυτά είναι με τον τρέχοντα προϋπολογισμό. Με τον τρέχοντα προϋπολογισμό των 2,5 δις. Τα 2,5 δις θα πάνε στο 1D και για το νοσοκομείο είναι περίπου μισό δισεκατομμύριο. Επομένως έχουμε το ερώτημα εδώ των όγκων. Πώς μπορούμε να έχουμε πιο ισότιμο σύστημα? Γιατί οι ασθενείς Γιατί η λιανική αγορά, ακόμα και αν πρόκειται για καινοτόμα φάρμακα, να πρέπει να επιστρέψει 4 στα 10 και για προϊόντα, για ασθένειες που είναι θανατηφόρες, να υπάρχει επιστροφή 60 και 70%. Γιατί να συνεισφέρει τόσο πολύ η βιομηχανία μας. Υπάρχει συγκεκριμένη πρόταση λοιπόν. Αν μιλάμε για ισότητα, ακούσαμε τον Υπουργό Σκυλακάκη να λέει ότι έχουν γίνει πράγματα. Στο υφιστάμενο σύστημα, έτσι όπως είναι τα πράγματα, νομίζω ότι αυτό που πρέπει να συμβεί είναι μεγαλύτερη ισότητα. Εάν διατηρήσουμε λοιπόν τα πράγματα όπως ήταν το 2021 στην αγορά λιανικής, θα βοηθήσουμε την καινοτόμο βιομηχανία να συνεχίσει να έχει επαρκή χρηματοδότηση για έρευνα και την δημιουργία προϊόντων σε θανατηφόρες ασθένειες. Υπάρχει, είπαμε, ακόμα το ζήτημα των νοσοκομείων. Είναι τεράστιο το φορτίο από τα νοσοκομεία και δεν ξέρουμε τι θα συμβεί. Αλλά εάν μιλάμε για ισότητα, πιστεύουμε ότι πρέπει όλοι να συνεισφέρουμε σε ισότιμη βάση. Αυτού λεχθέντος, έχω να πω λοιπόν ότι αν μάθαμε κάτι από την πανδημία του COVID είναι ότι πρέπει να έχουμε ένα ανθεκτικό σύστημα υγείας. Πώς θα το καταστήσουμε αυτό? Διασφαλίζοντας αειφόρο χρηματοδότηση η οποία θα επενδύεται και θα εξασφαλίζει ο κάθε ασθενής να έχει την κατάλληλη θεραπεία. Με αυτά λοιπόν, κυρίες και κύριοι, σας ευχαριστώ πολύ και ευχαριστώ να απαντήσω οποιοδήποτε ερώτημα.
Right, let's move on now to Mr. Dimitris Nikas, last but not least speaker. We are under pressure of time. He is the president of the Association of Health and Research Biotechnology Industry, the SEIV. I would like to thank the organizers, the American Hellenic Chamber of Commerce, for the reason that this subject is indeed a very interesting one. Now, we heard from the panel various ideas, a lot of things that had to do with the funding of the healthcare system. But what I wanted to refer to is the lessons learned so far from the 3 crises. The financial crisis from 2009 onwards until very recently, the COVID health crisis over the last couple of years, and recently the energy crisis, which is something we still haven't experienced, and I imagine it will cost some millions to the system minister. So they should be taken from elsewhere rather than health. Health expenditure is something like 7.8 or 7.9 or 7.6% of the GDP, but it's lagging behind the European Union average. And the contribution of the public sector is 60% and the private expenditure is 40%. Again, lagging behind, it's less, whereas private sector expenditure is higher in the EU. I would not want to refer to the key criterion of funding, which is life expectancy, survival expectancy, improving the quality of life of patients. I think that we need to see these things separately and to see why. Because a health system needs to answer the true needs of the patients. And with the very little money we have, we need to do the best we can. Both we and the health system agencies. So we can see that many problems of the healthcare system in our country are due to underfunding. It's something we've said time and again. It's very well known. This is the money we have. But also it's due to something else, which we are burying our head in the sand, is ineffective funding, which is the lack of an organized plan, the irrational distribution of funds, and the lack of evaluation and assessment units for the quality of our healthcare system. And also something that we saw really helped our economy of late, which was the digital transformation. It was very helpful for the rest of the economy of the country. It still hasn't reached our hospitals. I would like to share with you a slide, the next one, because after all these crises, we reach this slide. It's a situation we were in before the crisis, perhaps even worse than that. This is hospital debt, public hospitals debt. Reading the numbers, and I like to read the numbers, and I believe that you like it too, Minister, it's as though we haven't done anything. Is that true? Did we do nothing all these years? Do we still remain at those same levels of debt, public hospital debts to the providers? They're the suppliers who have pronounced cash flow problems, especially when we're talking about small and medium enterprises and even larger companies that find ways of recognizing or not recognizing their sales in the country. Well, if we separate them between procurements that are with a contract and procurements that are without a contract, would that be a different picture? Yes, you're right, and thank you very much, and this is a very good pass for me to say a couple of things. Minister, here we have something else that's lacking. We don't have the invoices that should have been issued until now. We're talking about sales already made in the healthcare system, and the issues whenever the invoices were never issued, because when the supplier received the order, they amount to 50 million. You know, it was something like 100 million plus when you took over. You regulated it and you settled it and installed it very, very well, but there is a new generation of invoices. Regarding contracts now, I think it's the other major issue that I wanted to refer to, or rather one of the issues that we need to look at, is there a system of procurements for hospitals which will allow procurements to become contracts? It's still very early. We're going back to 2012 when the Health Procurement Committee was set up, because the MKP still hasn't run those tenders with the hospitals, and I'm not talking about drugs only. So the suppliers participate in the funding of the hospitals through this delay in their repayment. But I believe that the budget increase without criteria and without evaluation of the healthcare units will create the same thing that we had a number of years ago, a black hole in which we are shoveling money. So here's a proposal, what we need to do. It's within the framework of the Natural Growth and Resilience Plan. Spending that is covered by the renovation and upgrade of hospitals and are channeled to digital transformation as well could use the leverage of the private capitals, and therefore the X amount of millions should be X plus the private funds. We should have a procurement system in place that would adopt new tools, like, for instance, reimbursement on the basis of the value offered and the very well-known risk-sharing agreements, the RSAs. And third, we should have a key fundamental factor, which is control, monitoring and evaluation of hospitals. If right now I were the minister and gave 100 million to a hospital to pay their suppliers, I'm telling you from my experience that that money would reach the suppliers after 5 or 6 months or never. There's a lot of such cases because there is no infrastructure to actually really control where the funding goes and to make sure that it goes where it should. In closing, I should like to say yes to the increase in the budget and the increase in health funding, but what must be done is a design and a plan, which for the moment we haven't seen. Thank you very much. Thank you very much as well. We have run out of available time. I don't know whether someone wants to make a comment, someone from the panel. Minister? Minister says that, well, what I would like to say that during my term of office, during my tenure, it's been quite sometimes 2 or 3 times where we signed the legitimization of payment of expenses for the hospitals. I don't know how many they may be. Were they 3? Mr. Nikas says maybe 4. Okay, says Minister, 4. Because from the point of view of the Ministry of Finance, arrears and overdue debts, for us, from the moment an invoice is issued, the way they are recorded in the system, in the fiscal system, they create a deficit and an obligation. Our goal is not to have overdue debts and arrears because the deficit, which is the limiting factor, our problem is not cash flow and liquidity. We have sufficient liquidity to cover the needs. Our problem is the deficit. So when the invoice is issued, the deficit is created. The problem is that when the invoice is issued and it is illegal, or when an invoice is not issued. So we can't pay unless an invoice is issued. A remark, if I may. Yes, things are like that in theory, but in practice, what happens? This invoice, you would pay it at some point because it is made legal through contractual. Have you thought that at some point a minister may not legitimize at the end of the day, or that the parliament will say no more legitimization or legalization? Yes. It's the way yes, it's just like that. But I want to say 2 things. First is that these procurements have to respond to patients' needs. It's not just a procurement up in the air. There are patients who enter the healthcare system to be cured. Second, the invoices are usually received and accepted by the hospitals, so legally speaking, many companies go to court and they are vindicated, legally speaking. Well, the second may be true because our judicial system works this way. And it works this way because that's the way it is, and I will refrain from commenting on that. As to the former, well, it's something that we need to measure, you see. Well, of course, this is the goal, to respond to patients' needs. But when something is not measured and counted properly and the proper and appropriate procedures are not followed, the risk for them to not respond, or at least part of them, to true, actual patient needs is a real and present one. It's existing, to call it in terms of urban civility and in clear terms and in polite terms. To put it politely, what is created is another cloud of activities that when at the end of the day one comes and legitimizes things in bulk, one does not know exactly what hides within this cloud in each and every case.
Θα ήθελα και εγώ να κάνω μια ερώτηση στον κύριο Σκυλακάκη. Η ερώτησή μου είναι γιατί είπατε νωρίτερα ότι υπάρχουν 3-4 δισεκατομμύρια από το clawback του 2019, επομένως από ό,τι αντιλαμβάνομαι υπάρχουν αυτές οι κατηγορίες υψηλής τιμής, τότε το clawback αντισταθμίζεται, επομένως αυτομάτως αντισταθμίζεται. Αυτό γίνεται στο νοσοκομείο. Αυτό ήθελα απλώς να ξεκαθαρίσω. Κοιτάξτε, εγώ δεν χειρίζομαι τα θέματα υγείας, τα θέματα των φαρμακευτικών. Επομένως, δεν θα ήθελα να επισέλθω στις λεπτομέρειες του clawback και της διαδικασίας αυτής. Και πραγματικά δεν μπορώ να σας δώσω απαντήσεις, διότι αν και έχω περάσει αρκετό χρόνο, εξακολουθώ να έχω μια καμπύλη μαθήσεως, η οποία δεν έχει φτάσει στο επίπεδο που να μου επιτρέπει να υποκαταστήσω τον αρμόδιο υπουργό.
Right, so thank you so very much. I believe that all issues were raised. Everyone said everything they had to say. Things are very well known. There's a request, if I may. We kindly ask you that you contribute in order for the state to buy less from us, but from all of us. Not to not buy from me, but to everyone. If you buy less from all of us, we would be all very happy. We're trying to do that. The criterion is to buy effectively, okay? to buy more effectively, with more skill at the end product, the health end product, so that the money is well spent. This is our common understanding. This is our common interest, and this is what we're doing. It's been 12 years and we haven't seen any results, says Mr. Apostolides. Well, thank you all very much. We need to close the session right now, so thanks everyone.